the comments now with our international affairs editor, Kethevane Gorjestani. Kethevane, we heard from Pete Hegseth, we've heard from the Kremlin and from Donald Trump himself, and we haven't heard as much from Ukraine. Ukraine doesn't seem to be part of these negotiations as things stand. What does this all mean for Kyiv?
Well, look, Pete Hegseth also said during that press conference that this was not a betrayal of Ukraine. But when you look at the facts, it sort of seems to point in that direction, at least. First of all, this is the end of about 3 years of the Biden administration's motto, which was nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine. We heard in the report that he first spoke to Vladimir Putin, then he spoke to Vladimir Zelensky. Donald Trump also said that he would be meeting Putin in Saudi Arabia. And when he was asked specifically by a reporter whether or not Ukraine was a co-equal participant in these peace negotiations, Donald Trump paused for a while. He said, very interesting question. And then he didn't answer the question, simply saying that it was not a good idea to have gotten into that war, talking about the Ukrainians who were defending an invasion from Russia. Second of all, Donald Trump has basically given in to all of Putin's demands before even a negotiation. Because when Pete Hegseth talks about the fact that a NATO membership is no longer practical, it's impractical, returning to the 2014 borders is unrealistic. No U.S. troops for any type of security guarantee for Ukraine going forward. These are all things that, in the background, of course, no European even thought that Ukraine would get into NATO in the next year or two. But there's one thing to think it, there's another thing to say it out loud and to give in to all of Putin's demands before negotiations. It's negotiations 101. If you take away all the bargaining chips of the Ukrainians to try to get some concessions out of the Russians before they even start talking, you're basically tilting the scale in favor of one side for the other. And finally, the question is now for Vladimir Putin. You could think, oh, he's gotten everything he wants. He's going to sit down and strike a peace deal. Or he's going to look at it and say, I've already gotten all of this. Now I can push even further and maybe get even more concessions. And that is going to be the questions. How is Vladimir Putin going to feel when he comes to these negotiating table? And he's going to feel probably very empowered.
And now there's going to be questions about how much he will look to go further into Europe. And we've also heard from Pete Hegseth saying that this is a European security problem. Europe has to deal with this as its own issue. In terms of the European reaction, though, we have already been getting quite a lot of that, certainly from European NATO members today.
Yes, the big powers of Europe reacting very quickly and saying basically a form of Ukraine and Europe cannot be outside of any sort of peace negotiations. But the Europeans are really scrambling also with the consequences of what has just unfolded in the past 24 hours. They're worried, first of all, for Ukraine, of course, being pushed out of these negotiations and pushed into a possible bad deal that would likely see the Ukrainians lose about 20% of their territory to Russia after 3 years of a brutal and costly conflict. Europeans also worried about an emboldened Vladimir Putin in the future, whether it's vis-a-vis Ukraine. Is he going to stop at 20%? Is he going to take a pause and then come back to it? Any other country on the eastern flank of NATO and of Europe? All this while left bearing the brunt of European security, as Pete Hegseth said, while Pete Hegseth and the Americans are basically negotiating over the heads of the Europeans with Vladimir Putin about security on the European continent. And I will finish with this pretty chilling analogy made by the former Swedish Prime Minister Carl Bildt, who talked about this potential deal between Trump and Putin on the eve of the security conference in Munich, talking about the Munich Agreement, which was signed back in the day by the UK, France, Italy, and Nazi Germany, providing the German annexation of parts of then Czechoslovakia in an effort to prevent a major war on the European continent. This was 1938. A year later, it was World War II that was officially broke out. And since then, the Munich Agreement, at least in Europe, is seen largely as a failed attempt to appease Nazi Germany, and he was making the parallel with what is happening now, possibly hinting to the fact that they are trying to appease Vladimir Putin, but it is not going to work.
Chilling indeed. And also a statement from UK Defense Secretary John Healey ahead of those talks saying there can be no negotiation of Ukraine without Ukraine. We'll see how this all mixes together when that conference starts in Munich this weekend. As always, Kethevane Gorjestani, thank you so much. Let's bring you the latest quickly now on news coming from the